I kind of wanted to go over let me put my slides in slideshow mode here. Um, the current state of things and some of the problems that we regularly see, and hopefully some solutions. So it's my idea here is sort of a problem solution kind of discussion, if you will. There's some elephants in the room though, and I want to set context first. And probably the most important piece, if you walk away with anything from this talk, is to remember this number. Now, this is a 2020 estimate by Evans Data, and I have not looked at their research, so I don't know how they came up with it. But in a way, it doesn't matter if the number is 32 million or 22 million, it's a lot. This is the number of programmers on planet Earth estimated. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And how many do you think work with, say, one AppSec tool? Just one. I mean, I don't know the number. I really don't. I'm hoping this new survey will give us some hard data to play with. I don't know that number, but in my anecdotal, and I get to talk to a lot of practitioners. That is one of the great blessings of who I am and what I do in this industry, is I know a lot of people and they are willing to tell me the truth. And my guess is it's a very small number comparatively. And then we might say, how many of these folks work in a real AppSec program? Well, that's a smaller number. How many of them have access to more than one tool, which, as we shall see, is pretty important, and more than one technique? And how many of them work with a mature program? I'm going to be generous. I think the number is in the 1 to 2 million, frankly, but I'm going to be generous and say it's 5 million. It doesn't really matter, because it leaves us with, say, 20 some millions of programmers who really don't know what to do, even if they've heard of software security, and don't have the wherewithal to do anything, because, as we shall see, they're kind of locked out. So remember this number, because at this point in my, at this point, non-existent career, where I'm just working to do what I can for software security, I'm worried about this number. Okay, and what's the state of the art? These happened at the same time. So this is a picture of an email that AT&T, their managed security service, sent me. Okay, that's on the left. That's a picture of an email. And it might have been a day difference between this headline on the right, 70 million stolen AT&T records, advertised for sale, on the dark net. Yeah. And by the way, I'm an AT&T customer. I'm a T-Mobile customer. In the same week, 30 million records were stolen from T-Mobile. So, I mean, these were headlines. I'm not telling you anything out of school here. And the usual security response to this, oh, their security, they must have terrible security. That's what happened. But I want to point out that AT&T have been running part of the internet backbone for decades. They have been running sensitive infrastructure, phones and networks for decades. And they do use their own managed security services. I asked them point blank. And so what if we assume, instead of that they're terrible, what if we assume that they're at the state of the art? And this is the best we can do. I really want to turn that statement, oh, they don't know what they're doing, on their head, because this is AT&T, and they've been doing this for a long time. And this tells us something really important. If we instead assume that they're at least, if not state of the art, at least competent and doing about as well as we can do in a large organization, that really starts to change the picture, doesn't it? That's the state of our security. is that even a really well-run organization, and I'm going to assume that they're well-run, can lose 70 million records. Interestingly, years ago, I was in a security sharing forum with the CISO of Equifax, and they had one of the most mature programs. This is in the aughts, 2005, 2006, long time ago. But nevertheless, if we assume they didn't lose all of their capability, then their huge breach, which they are still paying for, it's up to $1.2 billion at this point, last I saw. They're still paying for it. That they were doing about as well as we know how to do in large organizations. That's the state of what we're working with here. It's not pretty. We also need to understand the problem, and there's some computer science here, and those who know me well know that I've been touting this little piece of information for years. It is the Turing proof, 1936, long time ago. And it is that automated processes can't prove an automated processes is implemented correct. That doesn't mean we can't look at an algorithm and say it's mathematically a better algorithm. We certainly can. And I used to program out of Knuth Volume 3 algorithms all the time because I wanted the best algorithm for the situation. And that's a 1970s book, really old by today's standards, but it was state of the art at the time. So if we think about that, what that means is that even our best tools can't prove that implementation is correct. And this Turing proof still holds because the solution approaches infinity. Yeah. Add that to Turing complete languages, and I invite you to go look at what Turing complete languages are. That's what we use to program and the problems therein. And what that means is there are going to be bugs. There are going to be errors. This is a given. Just point out, many of you may know or may not, if this is new, great. All security coding errors are bugs. All weaknesses aren't coding errors. That's important to remember. Some are design errors, although they can be found in the code, as my friend Desar likes to say. It's not easy. You got to be really good to spot design errors. There are other techniques for spotting those, and we're going to go into that a little bit. But all bugs are, of course, not vulnerabilities. Just to be clear, and this is the state of what we are working with. People are going to make errors, and those errors are buried deep in our code or our API meshes. So somewhere back there, deep buried in the open source that you've carefully, I hope you've carefully selected for its security properties, along with other properties, buried deep in there is some piece of software that was written as a master's thesis 7 years ago. And that candidate has gone on to a fine high-tech career and hasn't thought about that piece of code in the last 6 years. And that's the reality of what we're working with here. Buried deep in our code or in our call trees of APIs. I have all these APIs I need to call, and somewhere buried in one of those APIs is an API written by the 22 million, more or less, programmers who are not working with software security and really don't know what to do. That's the reality. In the meantime, these seemed, when I was working with Sarah and Derek, who are on the call, these things seemed somewhat disparate from each other. They didn't really seem like they were actually, a one way, the way we make software. Each of these threads, Agile had been going on for a number of years. I mean, I'd been working with it for almost 10 years by the time I got to working with Derek and Sarah in the mid around 2014, 15, 16, something like that. Um, and virtualization was well in place. We all understood that, and we're working with various forms of that. By 2018, I would say almost everybody's in the cloud. I love these presentations that say, in your migration to the cloud, are you thinking about migrating to the cloud? I don't know who they're talking to, because I haven't run into a non-cloud hosted, at least part of it, implementation in years, frankly. And everybody uses data lakes if they have a lot of data. Yeah, sure. And they may be producing, if you're in the cloud, there's no reason not to use software-defined networks, because that's what they are. And you're probably doing continuous, and maybe you've been doing DevOps for a while, or maybe you've just started on a journey, or you're sort of there. All of these things come together. This is how software is built today. And if you're still thinking, and I'm not speaking to anyone in particular on this call, but for those who are still thinking, oh, it's an app built by an app crew for an IT implementation, and they're going to toss it over the wall to an infrastructure. That's not how software is built today. And unfortunately, when I look at AppSec programs, indeed, that is the way some AppSec programs or software security people are still thinking about the way software is built, but it's not. All of these pieces are all part of the how software is built today. Now, I want to dig into DevOps just a little bit, because I think the infinity symbol approach is a little bit off for DevOps. And since so many people are working in DevOps, I think it's important to understand what it means for software security or AppSec. I use the terms interchangeably. I don't see them as being different anymore. Used to be, but they aren't anymore. The problem with what you see on the left of this slide is that it's still linear. Yes, it continues, but the implication is that release follows configuration. Release will then configure, then we'll monitor, then we're going to plan again, then we're going to create. That's not what's going on, in a successful DevOps implementation. So I drew this thing that you see on the right, and I understand that my graphics abilities are terrible. But I wanted to show that these things are happening in parallel. They may not be completely continuous, completely infinitely continuous. They probably aren't. They're probably discrete moments when you move to planning, and the people who plan are doing that while people are writing code all the time, though, and people are testing that code all the time. And maybe there are discrete packaging moments, and there are certainly releases, unless you're doing absolutely continuous. There may be points, but there are different people, or people taking on different roles when they do these things, such that they are happening in parallel, and they're all held together. If you notice that hub in the middle, by our shared goals, our sense of purpose, our understanding of the software we're building, and by lots of feedback loops. I mean, just think about the daily stand-up in an Agile, if it's DevOps Agile, that gives everybody a chance to really discuss, what are we doing, and how are we doing it, and what are we going to do today, and the sprint planning. That's what did we do successfully, what did we not, the retrospective. All of those ceremonies are part of the feedback loops. And so you have this kind of continuous activity that happens in many different theaters, all, or domains, all coming together to achieve the same goals. And so, yes, my terrible graphic, but I hope that shows a little bit better what's actually going on. And that's what we must meet as security people. Our security programs must address that. And there's one other little thing. I mean, it's sort of a silly slide, and I'll move on here. But I can't keep up with the tooling. I run into new tools constantly, and I'm still probably way behind. And I have to go and research and figure out, what does this thing do, and how does it work, and what is its security implications. I mean, it really is mind-numbing, the number of tools, the amount of automation we can bring to bear on building and operating software. And that's something that as a security person, need to stay up on constantly. I will note that despite all the improvements in automation, not every part of our state-of-the-art security can be automated, but a lot can, which is really good. I have stood in lecture halls, presentations, where someone has stood up on the stage and said, we automate all of our security. And I think to myself, well, you're missing some of your security, because the state of the art ain't there. And I want to be clear with you that there is some stuff we still have to do by analysis, human analysis. I'm going to go into a little of that now, a bit more, but I think this statement from Adam kind of sums up our state of the art. And I love it. I'll give you a moment to read it. Software security is a multi-dimensional, multi-domain, multivariate problem. And any one, thinking that one approach is going to solve that problem isn't going to do it. We really have to think laterally and dimensionally and in a lot of different domains in order to solve this problem. And I love what Adam has to say. I think he has a great way of expressing things. And then there's this. This guy is, he addressed the RSA hack, which he was finally interviewed by Andy Greenberg in a Wired story that I found fascinating. I'd already known a lot about the RSA hack because they told me, because at the time they were one of my vendors when I was at Autodesk, and I said, well, I'm not going to buy anything from you unless you tell me you learned something. So they were kind enough to share a great deal about the hack, which was really, really opened my eyes a lot. But I think this is important to us to understand. We're not standing on really, really great ground here. There are a lot of problems, and they need to be addressed. And oftentimes simplistic solutions aren't going to get us there. So here we are, and we need tools desperately. They are our lifeline. There's no way we can do DevOps without security tools. And yet, if there's a vendor on the call, I'm going to take you to task for saying things like this, if you do. I really want to point out, and all the emphasis on this slide are mine, but these are real marketing quotes. I love this. Covers all your security gaps. One tool is going to do that. How does that happen? Multi-dimensional, multi-domain. Protecting customers from all cyber threats, even the ones that haven't been invented yet. How does that happen? That's an impossible statement. Absolutely impossible. Why do vendors say these things? We have to crawl through the jungle of silly statements to find out what a tool actually does and how it's going to help and whether we need it or not. I love the one in the middle about securing code as fast as you can write it. These are silly statements. Yeah, I don't know how that happens. Now, I might be able to find mistakes as I write code. That would be great. And almost every tool does that. And if in your implementation, you are not using your tool's ability to sit in the IDE, to sit on the coder's desk, please do it. Because that's when you're expecting to make mistakes as you code, and that's where it's most useful. Even if it's less than perfect, it's still something, and it's at the right time. So, getting security information about the code you've written is really important. But securing code as fast as you write it, and look at the little bubbles on the far left. I love that one. It seems so simple. We're going to reduce security risk with all this little simplest. Yeah, no, we're not. Okay. So the solution to this, I would ask of vendors, and we need your tools. We cannot do this without your tools. We are desperate for great tools, the best that can be. Believe me, I am not anti-tool. I can't do software security without the tools. It's not possible. On the other hand, please, no hype, no more hype. Don't look at me and tell me you solve all security threats, because that's impossible. I'm already suspicious. It's ridiculous. That's impossible. I want to know your real world effectiveness. So if some of your checkers are sort of maybe they kind of got it, and then some of your checkers will actually deliver 90%. I need to know what those are. I need factual false positive rates, really factual for all your checkers, so I can pick and choose the ones that will meet my risk tolerance, and maybe not use the ones that are too noisy for my developers, or let the developers decide. Bullet on the bottom. I have been saying this from stages for about 15 years. Let's focus on tools that are for developers to reach security, not sell to security people. Sure, security people have a play here because we have expertise. That's really important. That's great. But it's developers who need to own this problem, as we shall see, and then it starts to really go. Okay. I love what this, I don't know this person, DevData Hawe, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And if he's in the audience, please forgive me if I just mangled your name. But I think his statement is pretty clear. We need fast, customizable to our code bases. Yeah, easily added to any part, wherever they make sense in the whole way we make software security. Software, sorry. SDLC, software development lifecycle, and are effective at enforcing security patterns to help us prevent, to help us learn to be better. Yeah, I might have put it in a different way. Okay, here's another problem I run into all the time. Something happens, or someone finds a vulnerability, and a security person will say they should pen test all their code before release. This is another impossibility. This is not going to solve the problem. There are 27 million programmers or more on planet Earth, and we would probably need in the tens of millions of pen testers to do this, and they don't exist. But also, pen testers cost $500-600 an hour, usually, something like. Maybe you can find a pen tester who's less experienced for 200 or 250, but just that expenditure right there would put 90% of the software businesses out of business. So that's a non-starter right there. So let's not say this, okay? I'm not against pen tests, but we have to remember that every pen test is a unique combination of pen tester skill, the tools that pen tester is really comfortable with, and the pen tester's understanding of the target software. And that means you can't compare one pen test to another. It's a scalpel, a surgical instrument. It's something we use to prove, to get the attacker's view and prove our threat model. Very important. Did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? From the attacker's view, did we understand our target well enough and plan the right security? It's a proof. It's not a cure-all. I'm not saying we shouldn't pen test. Believe me, it's, when I look at testing, this is the range of testing that I think a reasonable, in fact, it's not just me. This information here comes from a study that I did when I was at Intel with Bob Hale and Catherine Blackadder Nelson. Now, I wish that Intel had published that study, because we looked at every published SDL, that is security development lifecycle, and we normalized the activities and discovered that actually there's a huge amount of consensus about what it takes to secure software, a huge amount of consensus. And our latest book with James Ransom, Building Insecurity at Agile Speed, actually uses the results of that, even though Intel owned the work and didn't publish it and whatnot. We still use the results from that. That's some of the research that went into that book. And the comparative agility survey is based in part on that work. So just, it's not like the work disappeared, but this, what you're looking at right here, is what it takes to do a robust testing or verification regime. And I'm not going to go over each of these things right now. I don't think I have time. I'm going to just touch on a couple of them, but I do want to point out that API and app scanning at the HTTP level for known vulnerabilities is different than a vulnerability scan. Those two are often called vulnerability scans, as an overloading of term there, but they're different things and they are different technologies. Obviously, code review, but it has to be done well. Static analysis is very useful, especially early on, if you can get it on the developer's desk, which you can if you look at your tools. And you'd be surprised how many times I go into a client and I say, are you doing any negative testing? And they say, huh? No, we test functionality. Yeah, it's really hard sometimes for developers to realize that it's the attackers who are misusing our software. And I'm going to go into fuzzing a little bit in a bit. So I want to touch back on fuzzing, because fuzzing is what we use to find the hidden or unknown unknowns. So, and it's coming along. There's some new tools that are allowing us to get at fuzzing and not be an expert, but I'll touch on that in a moment. Analysis noise. I hear this problem constantly. And the solution that I've used in my programs and have suggested is give up on find all, because that just creates a lot of noise. Instead, find out from your tool what the high confidence checks are or tests and use that as your baseline. High confidence, I mean, is low false positive, is that when it finds something, it's really a bug, probably. There's no 100%, of course. But demonstrate obvious value. I've used this in 4 programs now very successfully. You gain developer trust, and then allow your developers to find the right risk tolerance above your floor, your baseline, that they're comfortable with. Because many of them, some of them will just stay with the baseline. That's fine. At least you got that covered. But some of them will raise the aggressiveness till it's intolerable and bring it back down to where they can tolerate the amount of noise better. And that gives, the more we include developers, the better. And yeah, fuzzing has really become simpler. There are a couple of tools. I'm not going to name them here. I have no financial interest in them, but I'm really impressed with what they're doing. It has been very difficult, very expensive, and some of the tools looked at the wrong things certainly for application development. And it's been rather ad hoc, but it doesn't need to be anymore. There's been real maturity in this market. So please look again. And this is the only way, or one, not the only way, that's the wrong statement, but one of the best ways to find unknown things you hadn't thought about. Just sending, thoughtful, crappy data into your program can reveal a lot. And believe me, your attackers are doing it. All right, this is an old chestnut. In fact, one of my favorite people that is probably one of the most brilliant and earliest software security mavens, experts, I'm not going to name the person, we had a little spat on Twitter recently, where he was saying, yeah, they got to fix all their vulnerabilities. That's very old fashioned, and it's not possible. If you have 130,000 vulnerabilities in your queue, I never make up these numbers, by the way. I didn't pluck that number out of the air. That is, in fact, a real number of a real IT vulnerability queue, or 30,000. The moment you get to multiple thousands, it's too much for fix all. And the problem here is it is standard practice to use CVSS base score, but look at what it says at the bottom, and please go look at this research. It's fabulous, and there's a whole body of research confirming what they say here, subsequent to 2014, Alati and Musaki. And that is, using CVSS base score is statistically equivalent to choosing at random, which is how you get an Equifax, as far as I can see. So we're not going to fix them all. Well, maybe we are, but only if you can do this. You can actually fix them all. But, it would have to be discrete enough, and a minimal set of components and technology that's manageable. And, the point here is you update everything before build, and test, and test again. There are tools to help you with this, of course, and it can be automated, but you could actually fix them all if you have a most discrete enough. I do want to acknowledge that. For many situations, that's going to be impossible. I love A/B testing. I learned this from Francois Proul, who taught me a lot about cloud native applications back when I was at McAfee, and helped me really come into understanding how things can be done and are done. But A/B testing, of course, you would fix them all and then run it in a test in production. And if there was a problem, you'd just migrate back to the stable. So A/B testing can fix this. It's best in a CI/CD cloud-hosted environment. If that's what you're running, you might think about this. I've seen it done. It can help. Or get away from CVSS, because CVSS is not risk. Recently, now I've been watching Exploit Prediction Scoring System, or EPSS, since 2019 when it was announced. And you can go back and see my posts about it and whatnot, if you like. I think it's a massive improvement. Nothing is perfect, but it's a massive improvement. Well, there's a new API. And if you go to my True Positives practical AppSec post just last week, I believe, I've got a little sample code. It's not hard to use the API. It's really dead simple. And at least for recent CVE, common vulnerability enumerations, CVEs, you can just pick your tolerance. If you're in a high security situation, maybe your tolerance is anything above 20%, or if you're in a fairly low, high tolerance situation, you could pick 50 or 75%, and it'll give you all the CVEs you should fix. Boom, just like that. Really easy call. And I even supplied a little Python for those who need that. Just grab my Python and use it. Really easy, really amazing. EPSS is real, and you can use it. So please do. I need to be clear, it's only recent CVE. So if you have a lot of legacy, you still have to do the analysis for yourself. Okay, cloud security. What about cloud security? Well, the cloud takes care of some stuff. They have a business driver to do a really good job. That doesn't mean there won't be bugs. It doesn't mean that they can update the Linux kernel as fast as you might like. But they do have a deep business interest to make sure that nothing gets past them. So they're taking care of what your old IT used to take care of. But that doesn't relieve you of doing your own security. So it's not really shared. They talk about the shared responsibility model. There's nothing shared. There's a demarc line. I actually had this conversation years ago with an AWS security architect, And he said, yeah, it's really, there's a line. We take care of this stuff. You got to take care of the stuff. And basically, I think the way to look at this is any code you put into the cloud, you're responsible for its security. I think that's a really good way of looking at this. You're responsible for getting it there securely. You're responsible for its security while you operate it, but you're also responsible for the administrative functions and securing those. So obviously things like multi-factor authentication on all of your cloud tenancy portals and whatnot, maybe giving your SSH credentials or having SSH credentials for every person, every developer in production is not the best idea. And yeah, I run into that all the time. Not the best idea. You know, when it's 5 people and they're all watching each other, it's great. But when you get to 50, now you gotta keep secrets. Somebody can make a mistake. Yeah, that gets really edgy. By the time you get to 100, bad idea, really bad idea. Yeah, there are a rich set of protections that each major cloud offers you. Are you using them? I can't believe how easy it is to throw a web application firewall up in front of a web interface. I mean, it's a point and click, boom, it's done. You know, you can just use it in default and see if it runs for a while. Yeah, or put it in staging and hit it hard. You know, I mean, it's really easy. So are you using it? Are you separating? Setting up networks is trivial so that my second tier is separated from my API, is separated from my back tiers, and the API is the only thing that can talk to my microservices. Yeah, this stuff is really easy, really easy. And you don't have to manage credentials like you used to have in the old days, because the cloud takes care of all of that for you. All right, here's another problem we see all the time. Late engagement. This is the most common problem I see when I talk to security architects and developers. And when I talk to them, developers will say, oh, we hate getting our security requirements late. Oh my gosh, it's so bad. It just messes everything up. And security say, why don't they call us? We're so ineffective when we're called late. I mean, what good is a threat model when you're going live in 2 days? And you're not going to stop anyway. And it's so easy to solve. It is so easy to solve. You got to reach out. There is no ET who's going to phone home. Everybody has to reach out. Everybody has to take a responsibility. So for the developers in the room, please, if you know who your security people are, ask them to participate and include them. And security experts really need to talk to their development counterparts and say, hey, what do you got new that's coming on? After 5 years working with Cisco IT back in the aughts, the lead architects would just come into my office and say, I got this idea. What do you think? I knew about everything that was coming down the pike because I'd made these relationships, and I didn't even have to call folks and find out, because they came to me because they wanted the value of that. So, you know, prove your value and people will reach out. But it takes people, all the mandates in the world will not solve this problem. All of the SDLs that are beautifully written where, you know, security requirements come at the beginning will not solve this problem. People actually have to do it. All right, unplanned security. Usually this is a problem with no threat model, or worse, the threat model is unused because it was done by the security people and they did it and it didn't seem relevant to the developers. Late threat model, no. Biggest problem with threat modeling is that it's often looked at as a discrete activity, which it's not. I'll give you this. I'm one of the co-authors, disclaimer, but a lot of our practical wisdom we tried to shove into this. So I encourage you to go look at it and see what we had to say. Imagine 14 lead architects getting together and producing a bunch of work in a very short time. People came to work, fabulous people, one of the best experiences I've had in my career. Just absolutely great people. And here is important. Threat modeling is fundamental to secure design. It's our technique we use, right? And because of that, it's not a discrete thing. Whenever we're doing some design work, whether that's in our planning cycles or it's in our verification cycles, and we realize we have to redo something, threat modeling ought to be part of it. So it doesn't have to be a big, horrible experience that takes 5 weeks, somebody to write up a document. It should just be part of the way we think about things and say to ourselves, okay, now what could go wrong? And how could we prevent that? Those are Adam Shostak's 4 questions, but that's the simple part of it. And to be real, if you drive, I assume you have a threat model. There are a lot of risks to driving, as we all know. And if you drive, you probably have a threat model. If you walk late at night after clubbing in a city, you probably have a threat model. We all know how to threat model. That's not the problem. As far as threat modeling, really, once you get it started, it's a matter of just refining and revisiting. These sessions don't have to be big, horrible things that take 4 hours, and then we do it 5 times for over the next 2 weeks. No, it's just part and parcel of what we do. And, if we have a threat model, when we make a little structural change, we can go and say, did this change our threat model or not? And the sorts of things you're looking for are new components or change components, new data flows, new storage, that sort of thing. If you have new security items, that's a great time to threat model, or at least revisit your threat model, review it, see if it's changed. And importantly, attack methods, actually brand new attack methods, I'm not talking about new vulnerabilities, new methods do come maybe once or twice every year. They're not many. And at that point, it's good to see if they're relevant for your threat model. And of course, if you haven't got a threat model, start it today. Now, I do want to note that really importantly, the automation for threat modeling has improved drastically over a threat modeling tool from Microsoft, which is very noisy and very app-centric. And if you use nothing else, it's free, so start there. Absolutely. Nothing wrong with it. It just can be noisy and a bit hard to wrangle. But the commercial tools, of which I have no financial interest, so I'm not selling you anything here, have really improved. They are amazing. And they have community versions. So there's no reason for you not to use them. And they'll take care of all the simple stuff and leave you with only the really difficult things, the really innovative, the really, unique to your application pieces. You get a basic threat model really well and really fast. And at least one of those tools will go to your cloud instance and suck up all the stuff you're using and then build your threat model off of that. Very cool, very cool. So really, there's no reason not to automate at least some of this. But again, Virginia, you will have to do some analysis, but you can certainly automate it. And cool enough, if you're using the tools drawer, whenever you add something, it'll revise the threat model, or you can use something like UML and put that as part of your code. And whenever it changes, it can kick off threat modeling. Very cool. And there are tools for that. By the way, another problem I see is resistance. And this is really a people problem. For any security people on this call, we really have to get over the idea that we're coming in like cops to rein in a bunch of people who don't care. I haven't met a developer who doesn't care about security in years. I have not met a developer who doesn't care about security. They may not know what to do. That's most likely. As I said at the very beginning, 27 million, but they certainly have heard about it. They've seen the headlines of breaches. They just don't know what to do, or what they know is very, very constrained. That's one of the big problems. So if we help, if we trust, if we empower, but I do want to note that conflicts are essential to the process because we need to make decisions that are sometimes very difficult. And so you want to formalize any escalation paths and those and how decisions are made. You want to have a solid risk method that everybody understands. And you want to back your developers up. So if you have champions and they run in and their boss says, no, we're not going to do that, you can't expect them to fight that because their bonus and promotions are on the line. Security people have to be willing to pick that up and carry it beyond and back their developers up. That's very, very important. Yeah, and people who've worked with me know that one of the threads that I repeat all the time, not all the time, but once in a while, is it's an incredible responsibility, security. And when we tell developers that, most of them won't toss it off. Most of them will take it very seriously. And that means they'll reach out for help. Okay, so this was the big change in my ability to do security. I call it developer-centric security. Is to ask myself this question: how am I enabling developer creativity and innovation so that it can be secure enough? That's the critical question here that underlines nearly everything I've said. Let me just take one more problem, and that is open source is not free. When we use open source, we are trading our development today for a contract to maintain that open source and all of its security into the future. Product managers often misunderstand this, thinking they're getting development for free. It's not. Choosing which things to use can't be a free for all, unfortunately. I'm sorry, developers. Grab and go always leads to lots of technical debt. So security technical debt. So no, take a look, learn whether the security of the community and their practices are up to your standards, and then choose those packages. And we have to have somebody who watches for vulnerabilities in their patches. Yeah. Licensing is for the legal department. It's a different problem. Obviously, there are tools. I'll end this with saying that there's an ideal here, and that ideal is I want tools that are straightforward, that fit naturally with my SDLC and the IDE that we're using. I want obvious automation, understandable, reliable results, not to a security expert, but to me, a developer. And I want to see where the faulty code is. Yeah, and finally, it's got to be affordable. If all the security tools are chasing the same Fortune 2000 companies, who all have a tool, by the way, that does what your tool does, so they have to get their ROI. So it's always a replacement sale. You know, then 20-some million programmers are left out of the conversation. We have to figure out a way to address those folks. I'm going to skip this thing. You can look at it later. I'm going to pitch the survey. It's got decades of research and experience behind it. The industry consensus I already mentioned. It's for every development style, and it'll help you figure out where you are on your journey. There are some common myths. We have to get rid of those. There will be vulnerabilities. You're going to have to use a lot of overlapping complementary techniques, and you got a threat model, and you got a fuzz. I wish there was an ideal tool out there. I haven't totally seen it yet. Thanks very much.